And welcome everyone to another episode of Sharing with Shellshock. I am your host, ShellshockPrime, and this is episode 47, Video Game Storytelling. We are back with Sharing with Shellshock for the fall season after taking a summer break. But now, here we are. We are back with all these episodes. We got a new theme, and we got 3 guests, 2 returning, and 1 new guest. We're going to start off with you, Shad. Welcome back.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Yep, it's good to have you back on again. And the same thing goes for you, Zach. Zach, you're muted. I can't hear you. Don't worry.
Oh, I'm an idiot. It was my actual microphone. I was like, I unmuted in Discord, but it's actually my microphone. Hi, sorry about that. It's
Yep.
good to be back.
Well, welcome back. And Booey, welcome to the show.
Oh, nice to be here.
Yep, it's good to have you on.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So tonight, we're gonna talk a lot about different aspects about video game storytelling. But first, let's talk about a little bit about ourselves real quick. Shad, what type of content do you do?
So I am a variety streamer on Twitch. And I'm also, my videos get uploaded to YouTube, just delayed. I kind of stream a little of everything. I do a lot of randomizers and ROM hacks. I do a lot of Pokemon and Zelda content, especially, as well as visual novels. I'm usually always doing some sort of visual novel.
Yeah.
I also do a lot with Mario Party Madness.
Yes.
And like the current things that I've been streaming are an Ocarina of Time multi-world randomizer with 3 other streamers.
Yep.
Ace Attorney Dual Destinies, and a Pokemon ROM hack called Too Many Types.
Nice. Very nice. All right. Zach, what about you?
I'm primarily on YouTube. I don't do too much streaming, but usually on YouTube, I'll cover just kind of games that I'm personally like excited for that are coming out, or just retrospectives of games that I liked when I was younger. I'm also heavily part of the Mario Party Madness stuff. That's the one thing I sometimes do stream because those are always fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's mainly it.
Sounds good. And what about you, Booey?
For me, started streaming about a few years ago, about 5 years ago, and 5 or 6 years ago, and I've jumped around different genres to see where my footing would be. I went from like JRPGs to like survival horror to retro, but I think I found my footing in streaming Nintendo games.
Yeah.
So I'm more of a Nintendo streamer now, as you can see in my icon. And I'm currently doing a Zelda marathon. I put it on hold because I had some, life stuff going on. But I should be resuming streaming soon, sometime later this month.
All right. Sounds good. All right. So we're going to start things off with when did we started to get invested in video game stories and storylines? And for this one, we're going to start with you, Shad.
So storytelling in general, I've always been really into. From a young age, as soon as I could like write around like elementary school, I started actually writing stories myself, and I've always been really into like fiction and storytelling. My video games I started when I was 5. I started with a Super Nintendo. I played computer games still before that.
Yeah.
But that was my first console. So I kind of always grew up with interested in stories, and right from the onset with video games. A lot of my earliest games were like Mario games, some Disney games. They didn't have a ton of story. I'd say though that I got more heavily into the storytelling games probably around the N64 era.
Yeah.
Because I was really young with Super Nintendo, and I didn't like I did. No, really, probably though my first heavily story-based game that I played was Super Mario RPG, and that might be like around the start of it. So,
Yep.
other than that, I just kind of got more and more into, especially RPGs are a huge thing for me because of the storytelling aspect of them.
Right.
And yeah, it's taken me to today. While I'm primarily do a lot of Nintendo gaming, I play a lot on other platforms, especially at this point on Steam, and I'm always interested in story is one of the most important things that I end up focusing on for games.
Yeah. Very good. And yeah, Super Mario RPG, that's a really good choice to go with, because that one is actually like that one actually had a really good story, especially for Mario
Yeah,
at that time.
yeah. I went to it because it was Mario, and that was what I was familiar with. I just didn't know what an RPG was at that age,
Yeah.
and I think that's why it resonated with me so heavily, is because I didn't realize how deep storytelling could be in video games until I kind of stumbled into that.
Okay. Now Zach, what about you? When did you start to get invested in video game stories and storylines?
It's actually kind of funny because funny enough, I'm kind of the opposite of Shad. Like growing up, it's not that I didn't like stories or anything. It wasn't some like I just kind of wanted just a fun game to play. Especially me because I'm a little younger. Like so, I didn't really like like when I was a kid, it was always like the Mario's and like
Yeah.
I didn't care too much about the stories until, granted, this game doesn't have the heaviest story, but when I played Until Dawn, I started to get into like I really got invested into the characters in that game, which started to get me a little more like okay, like because I care so much about the characters, let me start diving into stories or into games where characters are a little more heavily focused and I can focus on their development, which led me to get into more of the story driven games. And as someone who isn't into RPGs, it's a little rarer, it's a little harder to come across games that are more story focused in that aspect. But
Yeah.
as I've gone through the years of gaming and opened my horizons a little bit, I actually have found a decent amount of games that focus on the story that aren't RPG heavy. And Until Dawn only came out, what, I think 10 years
20,
ago? So it's been like
2015.
2015.
Yeah,
So yeah, 9
2015,
years ago. So that's how recent storytelling games have been to me. So yeah, very very recent thing for me. Well, I mean 9 years, but for me being 26, 9 years ago, it's 15. So yeah,
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. I never really played any of the Until Dawn games, but I've heard they're pretty good. So,
yeah.
all right. What about you, Bowie? When did you start to get invested in video game stories and storylines?
I'd say around probably fourth grade. That's around the time that my mom would take me to her best friend's place, and
Mm-hmm.
then they would go ahead and talk to each other and at the kitchen table, and then I would go hang out with her son,
Mm-hmm.
who would play a lot of video games, and a lot of them were story based, and they were JRPGs as well. So he let me borrow Final Fantasy IV, which is Final Fantasy II in the U.S. at the time.
Yes.
And that's when I started getting into more story-based games, which is Final Fantasy II. Then after that, I got into some more RPG, and then after that was Final Fantasy VII. That's my first major game that had a lot of story. That was very where the story is pretty integral to the game.
Yeah.
So that's when I really got into like story-based video games with Final Fantasy VII, and so that really opened my horizons to like what storytelling can be and should be, or can evolve from.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Final Fantasy VII pretty much.
All right. That's actually a very good choice as well. Um, so for me, I started to get invested in video game stories and storylines when I was younger. I'd say like the first game that was really invested with the story. Because growing up, I didn't really start playing video games with a heavy emphasis on story until like when I was a lot older. Like I was like a little bit after 10. Because before that, it was basically mainly playing games where you get from point A to point B, or I'll go to arcade games, play like fighting games or playing racing games and all that stuff. but the first game that I remember playing growing up that had a heavy amount of story was a Sega Saturn game called Guardian Heroes. And that was a beat 'em up that was made by Treasure, which you had multiple paths you can go through. You start off with the first two stages that were always the same, but afterwards you have different forks. You get to go to different paths. You get to meet different characters, fight different bosses, and there's like about like seven different endings in the game. And you could play it with up to like 5 other people. Like if you had the Sega Saturn like multi-tap. But the first major one that I felt like really hit me really hard in terms of how good the story was and how invested I got, Earthbound. Earthbound, because I remember like reading about this game in magazines and then seeing Ness and Super Smash Bros. For N64. So I wanted to get myself Earthbound for Super Nintendo, and I asked my mom if she could find a copy of the game to get it for me, and she did, which I still have to this very day. And I remember like just started off with like just a meteor, like a meteor landed, and then after that, it just kept building up, just seeing all these quirky characters. Many of the characters kind of felt reminiscent of like the Peanuts gang, like Charlie Brown and all them, or like other mediums of pop culture. There's even Mr. T in the game. And what I remember is just seeing just where the direction the story was going. And what I loved about it is how deep the connections I have to these characters, like how like these characters will grow as you go on, and also who the bad guys really are, and also how like when push comes to shove, like when things are starting to get really tough, the aspect is it's not just never giving up, but also just having all the strength, all the courage just to be able to get through and get rid of like get rid of the evil threat that you have in that game. I don't want to say too much of spoilers because I want people who have never played it to play it, but it's one of my favorite stories. And then since after that, it actually got me into RPGs. It actually got me into like action games with really good story, a lot of cutscenes, and even went back to playing some older games that had a lot of cutscenes, a lot of different storylines that I just got really into. So I've been into it since I was like at least 10 or 11 years old. So that's when I first started getting into video game stories and storylines. And that's the first part of the episode. So the next thing is I want to know, what do you guys think makes a good story for a video game? And Zach, we're going to start with you.
For me, there's a lot of elements that make a good story. There's a lot of different things, but for me, I mean, first, all right, I'm going to talk about two main things. I feel like it's going to be the general consensus, but I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Firstly, I think the characters that you have make a good story, because you could have the best world building, you could have the best narrative, you could have all this great stuff, but if your characters lack any depth, lack any substance, if they're just boring, then all of the rest of it just kind of falls flat. If you have characters that are interesting, that have good dialogue, that are unique, that are visually interesting, it could even help some other elements that, might not be as great because the characters are the people that you're spending the most time with. Yeah. And especially with more recent games and non-RPGs where characters have a lot of dialogue, where it's like actual voice dialogue, you have voice actors. if you get like really good character interactions, it can really, in my opinion, build an experience and make a story more believable. Like we've all seen the cheesy voice acting in some games where it's, you know, it's a little cheesy and not super immersive, but then you have the really good voice acting that's like it's like Oscar worthy. Like it's like, oh my god, like it tugs at your heartstrings, and it's like the characters and even more specifically the voice actors behind them can really help make a story more believable. And that goes into the second point I have, which is the world building or just the world in general. If you have a setting or a world that you just kind of believe in, like a game I'll reference here, which I'm going to talk about in one of my later points, but Life is Strange, which is a game I actually only got into recently. And of course, since I'm younger, all of my games are going to be a little newer. So for the older crowd, I apologize.
No,
But,
you're fine.
Life is Strange, the first game, is basically all set within this little town in the state of, I think it's Oregon. And it's like the more you like learn about the residents and the people there, you really feel like this town is a real place, and a decision at the end of the game, which I won't spoil, heavily relies on you having that attachment to the world and to the town. And without that feeling important, the story itself would fall flat on its face.
Yeah.
So I think that having both a strong world to which the characters live in, as well as a strong cast of characters. I mean, if the narrative, like, if the storytelling makes those two things, I'm horrible at my wording here, but if the storytelling itself makes those two aspects like shine, then those two elements are the most important to me.
Yeah, and that's also really valid. And when it comes to wording, no, you're fine. You're absolutely good. You're good.
Yeah.
You're fine. All right. So, Bowie, what about you? What do you think makes a good story for a video game?
What makes a good story for a video game? I'd say for I'd say for like if you want to make a video game really impactful, I think it's you would want to make the game show and not tell. When I say show don't or show and not tell or show and don't tell,
Yeah.
I'd say a very good example would be Super Metroid.
Yeah.
That's besides the very beginning where Samus she explains creates exposition on the events that happened at the very end of Metroid 2, so Return of Samus.
Yeah.
And in the very beginning of Super Metroid. Besides that part where she actually there's like dialogue.
Yeah.
The rest of the game is just no dialogue, and the whole entire environment actually shows you the story of what's going on.
Yeah.
And how Zebus came to be, why is it in such a state. But as you travel throughout Zebus or Zebes, however you want to pronounce it, as you travel through Criteria and Brinstar and Meridia and Norfair and Torian, you see the story throughout the whole environments, and you get to actually it invokes a lot of emotions with the music too. And as there's going to be some occasional points in this story in the game where you'll see the Metroid come in, and is it okay to spoil? I mean, it's a really old game. It's okay to spoil the end or whatnot.
Well, the only thing I'll say about it is like, you could say it, but all I'm gonna say is, I agree with everything that you said. You made some really good points on Super Metroid. But go ahead.
Okay. So, I mean, there's going to be scenes that happen in the game that aren't even explained in dialogue and not even in words. You just see it happen. And there's even environments in the wrecked ship where it actually makes you wonder how this happened, why the wrecked ship is there. And there's like theories that maybe this is the ship that the space pirates were crashed into Zebus, or maybe this is an ancient pirate ship from long, long ago.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what makes showing not telling so impactful, is that it makes you wonder. You see these environments, that's how the designers make such a compelling game, is that it makes you wonder about what happened here. It makes the game more alive.
Yes.
So it happens with other games too that have very minimal dialogue, like the Team Eco games. They are a really great example of
Ooh.
showing and not telling. Very minimal dialogue, but they explain with the environments as you explore throughout their worlds.
Right. Yeah, those are games I will eventually get to someday.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely recommend the Team Eco games.
Awesome. Yeah, you made some really good points. And honestly, like with Super Metroid, like it's funny how you talk about it because like I'm wearing the Super Metroid shirt right now.
It's a really cool shirt.
Yep.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So Shad, what makes a good story for a video game for you?
So I approach this question a little differently because I have a bit of an academic background here. For those that don't know, I part of my undergrad was I was spent almost 3 years in video game design, and then my minor ended up being creative writing, including a storytelling class.
Yes.
And I've my whole life been wanting to be a published fiction author. So when you look at storytelling in a lot of other mediums, there you can be a little more straightforward on what's important for storytelling. But video games being an interactive storytelling with a wide range of gameplay, it's very different what's important to tell a good story in games. A game like a role-playing game, uh, dialogue is very important for storytelling. You need interaction between characters, while in a more like, for example, as you're talking Super Metroid, a Metroidvania kind of like uh, exploration game, a lot of the storytelling to not make the pace get too broken up needs to happen in environmental storytelling,
Yeah.
in what you see around you, and you draw kind of conclusions there on what happened. And then there's some games that are really in the middle. Like I would say Metroid Prime is somewhere really in the middle where you get straight out, have stuff spelled out in different like logs that you read throughout the game,
Yeah.
but you also have a lot in the environment that you have to learn just from looking at the environment and looking at the events that happen in the game that don't have much dialogue. In general, I think that makes it a little trickier to pick a one size fits all on what's important to storytelling in video games. Rather, it's kind of a little more genre to genre.
Yeah.
But ultimately, yeah, I think games you'd consider story heavy, like role playing games or visual novels, benefit from more direct storytelling, while games that are more gameplay focused, more like action or adventure and exploration, stuff like that, you need to rely a little more on environmental storytelling and on the show don't tell thing. And I think that's very important to keep in mind when you're making a game, how you want the story to be told to players and how you want the players to be able to like. And then there's just the fact that it's good to have storytelling that you don't know just your first playthrough fully what's happening in some things. Sometimes you need to look at it more closely or discuss it with other people, and that's always a very fun thing about interactive storytelling
Yeah.
or interactive media, because you can tell a story in a way that a book or a movie can't, because you don't have to do it linearly, and you get to have the player help shape the story, which is a whole nother thing of having stories with branching paths or stories where you, the player, your actions make up part of the story itself.
Yeah. So the way that I personally want to approach what I think makes a very good story for a video game is it just depends on the genre. It just depends on what type of game I'm gonna get into what story and what story is already there. So like I 100% agree with you guys when it comes to the points that you've made. Like
Everybody's at great points.
exactly, like the show but not tell is definitely very important. What I also think is important is also like when you have like the entire world, how well built each world has been. Okay, let me word this carefully because I'm stumbling on my words today. I apologize for that.
I feel that. I feel that.
Uh, for me, I feel like in terms of world building, it's a matter of how much depth and effort was put into building the world, the characters that were actually made, and how much you can actually connect with them. Because I feel like if there's a character in a game that I can't connect with, then they don't really do anything for me. Um, and to bounce off what you said, Zach, because you definitely do not want to have characters and storylines that will end up being boring in the end. Like I definitely understand that, but to me, like I want to be able to see if I can relate to any character in certain aspects, in certain like situations. Sometimes I can't, but I can still connect with them in other ways. Like for example, if someone were to be able to fight like fight giant monsters, for example, I can't do that, but I feel like if I could live vicariously through these characters because they can do that, since I'm in control of these characters who can do that, and they give a good reason as to why they're doing it. What's making them fight these monsters, for example, or if or in some cases, if a game is supposed to feel like you're watching like a movie and like the characters feel real, um, and how much I could connect with them. Um, like for example, like when I played BioShock and how like usually games like that tend to have different themes. Like it starts off with the main plot, but there's usually hidden themes. Like for example, if a game has political themes, if a game has like religious themes or the like, and how well they actually fit into the game's plot. Sometimes they don't tell you directly about like these elements. You just happen to find them, and then they add more to the story. Um, like I played many different games that apply to that. Um, or for example, like some stuff that's just made up specifically for that world, and you get to know more about these characters. You get to know more about their backstories, where they come from, and and then the type of settings that they had to deal with, situations. Um, but then you also have stories in which is basically just simple, like where there's one crazy guy that just wants to kill everyone because like he just wants to kill everyone for the sake of it. But then you find out that it turns out he had a troubled childhood, or for example, if he had something that just happened to him that led to that particular point in his life. Um, to me, um, I think for me, I like being able to connect with a character is one of the things I really think that makes a good story, but also trying to connect to the entire world of where the character comes from and what is it that they do, why are they put into a situation, why is it that this character has to deal with this or that and all that. um my thing is that I just care about connecting with the characters a lot more and the setting. Everything else, everything else is just for me like how well the game is actually written. um I have been getting into a lot more RPGs over time. I've been getting into visual novels over time. Um, but for me, like one of the one type of game I wanted to get more into. I want to get into those classic old school point and click games from like the 80s, 90s, and even the 2000s. Like stuff like Monkey Island, for example. I want to get into those types of games. Because I've always been hearing that they have really good stories. So those are something I want to look into in the future. Um, but that's pretty much what I have to say in regards to what makes a good story for a video game. Um, but now, the next question that I want to ask, and this is basically, you can have up to three choices, mainly because of time. But what would you guys say would be your favorite video game storylines? Um, and again, three choices. Bowie, I would like to start with you.
What was the question again?
What are your favorite video game storylines?
Mm, like, could you clarify what you mean by video game storylines? Like, are you asking like what game story, like which storylines from which games I like, or
Yes, that one.
okay? Oh yeah, that's a lot. I have a lot that there's a lot of video games that I've played that really moved me and captivated me over the years. Uh, I'd say, oh man, that's a lot. I guess one would be The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
Mhm.
That's one.
Yeah.
Let's see. Super Metroid, that's another. When I was talking about the showing not telling, it tells a great story without even having to have any dialogue.
Yes.
And let's see. Oh, there's the final one. I'd say, it's, I would say Metal Gear Solid 3. That'd be a great story too.
All right.
Storyline as well.
Yeah. I never really got into Metal Gear. I tried getting into them. I did buy the collection, so I would like to give it a chance again someday. But I did hear Metal Gear Solid 3 had a really good story.
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, what about you, Shad?
So yeah, it's really hard to limit to three. And like the three I'm picking are not necessarily my top three because it would take so long for me to like try to decide what really would be a top three stories. And before I say that, I do want to say an honorable mention to AI the Somnia Files, but I'm not going to really talk about it because there's no good way to talk about that game without spoiling massive amounts.
Right.
So just go play that. But the three I'm picking, the first one is Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask, which is my favorite game of all time. And a lot of it is because of the storytelling, and this is an excellent example of a lot of environmental storytelling and a lot of the story being told in the like side optional content.
Mm-hmm.
Majora's Mask's story on the surface seems very simple, but it has a lot especially for Zelda, it has a lot of side stories. And they really do a lot for world building of Majora's Mask, which I think a lot of games can learn from that kind of storytelling.
Yeah.
Though nowadays there's lots of examples of that. But I think that Majora's Mask does it in a way that even Zelda hasn't really quite done anywhere else, because Zelda tends to have more linear stories usually than Majora's Mask.
Right.
And I want to mention that the 3DS remake does lose storytelling aspects by changing aesthetic stuff in the environment. And that's something people don't think about, and people don't necessarily understand how you can make a game worse just by changing some visuals, but you can lose storytelling elements.
Yeah.
The second game that I am picking is Final Fantasy VI, which is my favorite entry in the Final Fantasies, though I'm still have to fill in a lot of gaps for that of the games I played. But 6 told a story in a way that no other Final Fantasy games did, there's a lot of interesting stuff you can read about the development of 6, and they really approached it where they didn't intend there to be one main character. They wanted every character to feel like a main character in their own story, and it came together to make a more realistic feeling game world where everybody's lives don't center on a central plot point. They're all happening simultaneously, and they've never really been able to do that again in Final Fantasy, which, to be fair, that's a pretty big scope, especially with the size of games nowadays.
Yeah.
But I definitely think that people should check that out because there are some groundbreaking story choices they made at the time that nowadays might not seem as big a deal, but at the time, like, I can't talk about them without spoiling them, but at the time, it was the first game to do a lot of these choices. And the third and final game I'll mention is Persona 5 Royal. I want to mention Persona in general, and it's really hard to pick one. Royal is just the first Persona game I played, and so it feels more special to me, but I'm not saying any of them is better than the other ones.
Mm-hmm.
A game like that, the storytelling is linear, but it's very deep, and there's a lot of characters with their own stories that you get to know, almost kind of like Final Fantasy VI did, except for, of course, these don't. These are all side stuff you learn about them.
Yeah.
But a lot of it reflects a lot of traditional stories of the hero's journey and storytelling that can be done with tarot cards. But it does it in a way that it has a lot of plot twists you can't expect. It has each character be very well developed and very likable, very well written characters, great voice acting, and a lot of its themes are kind of darker and heavier, which makes you more invested in it and it more painful during the sad or otherwise negative scenes because it hurts to see the characters suffer. And I think that's a really good thing in storytelling. If you can make the player, well, in the case of games, player, feel emotional about the game.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
All right.
so Shell,
What's up?
is it okay if I start over for my storyline thing
Sure. Why not? Yeah. Go ahead.
after everyone's done? Oh, okay. You want me to go ahead? Okay. So, since I was put on the spot for this question, I have better answers for my the storylines like that I like from my top 3 games.
All right.
So I already explained Super Metroid. Second one would be Link's Awakening. So that's actually my most favorite Zelda game of all time. And what I liked about Link's Awakening, after learning more about it, is that it was actually a side project for one of the developers at Nintendo. He and some other team members, they decided to go brainstorm and work on this game after hours.
Mhm.
It's like a pet project that they were working on. And eventually, that's why the game feels so dreamlike, has so many like random Nintendo characters in it, because they were just making this as just a fun side project until Shigeru Miyamoto came in and saw that, and they decided to greenlight that into a Zelda game. I liked how Link's Awakening was very experimental. It actually had it's a game where Link is not. It's actually probably the first game where Link wasn't, where the setting wasn't taking place in Hyrule. It was taking place in Koholint.
Yes.
And you just find out that as Link adventures throughout the land, throughout the island of Koholint, he finds out more and more about the world through the inhabitants, through all the characters he meets. And I actually found out that this game was actually inspired by Twin Peaks as well. That's why the characters are so goofy and zany, or just pretty much weird.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think that's why that's what drew me into Link's Awakening. Is just the story is just so heartfelt. It has a lot of heart, And I tend to like darker Zelda games. So towards the end of the game, you find out more about the nature of the island. So it's just a very unique game in that regard.
Yeah.
And then so my third one would be Silent Hill 3. For Silent Hill 3, it's a sequel. It's a direct sequel to Silent Hill 1, and you play as this the main character. Her name's Heather, and with the story, since it's I don't want to say too much about Silent Hill 3, but as you play as Heather, she's a very very opinionated, and she has a lot of attitude, and in a good way.
Yeah.
Whenever she reads the flavor text and from the objects that's surrounding her and the environment that she ventures. So what I love about Silent Hill 3 is that it actually the all that flavor text that you read that she all the flavor text that that you read from her really fleshes her out. I really like how she's just a very real character as you go through the game. You find out who Heather's true nature is, and it's just I don't know. It's a very short game, but it's just a game I really loved. Silent Hill 2 used to be my most favorite game and that game was very very story rich too.
Mm-hmm.
But Silent Hill 3 became one of my most favorite games in terms of story because of just how realistic they made Heather. So I would, if you wanted to check out a really good, great game, you should play Silent Hill 3.
Yep. Funny enough, I'm actually going to be playing Silent Hill 2 next month.
Oh, nice. The remake or the original?
I'm going to do the original. But yeah, I'll be playing Silent Hill 2 next month, and eventually I'll get to Silent Hill 3 and check that one out. Zach, your turn.
This one, like everyone else said, was really hard. I do want to give a little shout out to Shad's answer of Majora's Mask. I didn't even think of that one, but that one was a really good one. I think all three of these games are very different in a lot of ways, which I think is good. The first game I wanted to quickly talk about, I did mention it before, was Life is Strange. The whole series has really good stories, but I want to quickly really talk about the first game, because this actually leads to a point that you said earlier, Shell, was how having a relatable protagonist, someone that you can really see yourself in.
Yeah.
Max Caulfield is the protagonist of the original Life is Strange, and she is such, at least to me, a relatable character. Someone who's not like extraordinary in any way, but that just makes her all the better. And the way that the game is structured, it's episodic, so there's like 5 episodes that you complete, and the first 3 are really about building, the world and getting you invested into the characters and the story. And then the last 2 where everything is really crazy and like crap hits the fan, and it's really it has a lot of twists, has a lot of turns, and those twists and turns really hit because of how the first 3 episodes really set everything up, and it's just so masterfully done. And even like there were sequels, and they're amazing too, but they just don't hit the same way that the first game does. And I played the first one after the sequel, so it's like so it's not my nostalgia talk for the first one. It's like it's just the way the first game does it. So it's like I don't even know. It's such a great one, and I don't want to spoil a lot of things, but the main character has an ability to rewind time, which with a story, there's so much that you can do with like going back and redoing choices, and it messes with things so much, and I just love how the game does it. And there's a new game coming out, which I will be playing. It's love the series so much.
Nice.
Secondly, I won't spend too long on this one because this game is talked about to death nowadays. But The Last of Us, I actually just recently played that game. I know the game is over 10 years old, but I actually just recently played it.
Yeah.
And holy crap, what a story! At the beginning, I won't spoil if people haven't played it, but the beginning, this is the first scene that's before everything happens, and it hits. And then the game, you don't really like the protagonist at first, but then he grows on you, Joel, he grows on you, and then he meets Ellie, and it's such a solid story. The world, well, I don't feel an immense connection with the world. That's where I think the characters really made up for everything.
Yeah.
Just the characters of Joel and Ellie and their adventure just really hits, especially towards the end when things really start to happen. It's just such a great story. I haven't played the second game, so I can't really talk about that one, but the first game was really strong and solid, and I can't wait to get into the sequel. And then the last game I want to talk about is a little more of an unconventional pick, and I really hope that I hope that this counts. It's a smaller title, and maybe you've played it. It's called This War of Mine.
I've
It's
heard of it.
it's a it doesn't have a story in the typical sense. It's a story that you kind of create yourself. You lead this gang of survivors through a war, obviously, and your characters have needs and wants. They have backstories. They can live, they can die. It's just how you manage things and how you take care of them. And it's one of those games where it's like, it's a game that can take a while to complete. I've actually never fully beaten a run of it because it's very difficult. And I've like had characters that die, and I legitimately feel an emotional impact because even though it's not a game that's all about the story like games like Life is Strange and The Last of Us are, you still feel that attachment to the characters in the world because the war in the game feels very real because it's also a game that is heavily show not tell, right? You have to look in the environments to see the war going on in the background, or you have to listen to the radio to hear about peace treaties and about other conflicts and about rationing and about all this stuff that really makes you feel a little more invested in getting these characters out. And it's just such a strong game, and like the music as well. That's another thing that actually can really make a story good, is when you have a good soundtrack to accompany everything that's going on.
Yeah.
That game just really puts it all together, and it's like I think it's an indie game. Like, it's a very small, lower budget-esque game, but it just hits all the right notes, and it just makes a really, really strong story.
All right. For This War of Mine, I'm gonna have to take a look into that game in the future. So, in terms of what are my top three, like, or rather my three games that I'm gonna go with, I will bounce around a little bit by putting Link's Awakening as an honorable mention because yes, that game, that was a fun story right there. I absolutely had a good time playing that game like when I was a kid, and then also playing it again, the Game Boy Color version, and then also the remake. I had fun. Um, but in terms of and the funny enough, Shad, Final Fantasy VI was actually originally going to be one of the answers I wanted to go with, but I'll put that as an honorable mention because that story is great.
Good choice.
Yes, it is my favorite Final Fantasy right now, but because I still have more to play. Um, but that being said, so the three that I'm gonna go with, Earthbound is definitely number three for me. You would think it'd be for anyone who would know me personally, they would think that I would put Earthbound on number one. But there are some other stories that I'm gonna go with, which I'm gonna get to. But with Earthbound, like I've already explained, how much that I could connect with like the characters and how I was enjoying how the storyline was going. But the one thing I will say about Earthbound is that that game personally actually did save my life. Like that I was not in a good place during the time that I first played Earthbound, and it actually got me through it really good. And I will forever be grateful for that game. But having said that, with that game itself, one of my favorite things about the game about Earthbound is how like again the quirkiness of it all, but I do love the soundtrack. I love all the trippiness that that game has, like when you're battling and you see like all the random trippy backgrounds. Though if you played it on Wii U, 3DS, or Switch, or the SNES Classic, they did kind of have to reduce some of the trippiness of trippy effects because of preventing seizures, which is very valid that they do this. Um, but at the same time, like like it's still there, just not to an extreme level. But I do like how like you would see these backgrounds just moving, and you would see like the characters that complement the background. For example, like a character that looks like a belch or like a barf. Because I feel like some of those characters, like, because Nintendo of America was doing the whole like scratch and sniff stuff, like the whole like cashing in on the 90s like toilet humor,
Like, gross out humor.
the gross out humor, yes, and
Yeah.
Ren and Stimpy was huge, so that's how we were back then. But yeah, um, but the thing about it was, just the characters themselves, like just the storylines, are really what sells me onto the game more than like the gross out humor and all that stuff. Um, but yeah, so Earthbound will be number 3 for me. Number 2 for me, um, and I've actually thought about this one. And one of my other favorite stories. This one is actually like this game originally came out on the 3DS and Vita, and then it got remastered years later. Um, and and I absolutely do enjoy this series a lot. There's 3 of them, but I absolutely enjoyed the Zero Escape series, but the game specifically that I'm going to be talking about is Virtue's Last Reward, specifically
I was
because
considering that one.
that game, like, there's just so many twists and turns that game has. I mean, the whole series has a lot of them, but this one was the one I really liked the most out of the 3. So, just seeing the characters, and finding different ways to escape in comparison to the first game, and also like I was able to connect with like a good portion of the characters that you see. I will say I connected with the main character in Virtue's Last Reward more so than I did from 999. So uh even though there's some stuff about him that like I was shocked to see the moment I've actually played this game, which I don't want to spoil, but man, this is one of those games in which that you really have to play the game just to see what it's all about, because um there's so much that happens. Like, though, if people want to see more, like, you can watch my VODs in the VOD archives on YouTube, because I did play those games. But yeah, Virtue's Last Reward is my favorite of the 3. I was hoping that Zero Time Dilemma would have been like taking it to a completely different level, but for me, it didn't. But
It's not a bad game, but
it's
it's
not
not as
about
good as the previous 2.
yeah, that's how I feel. But they're all great. They're all worth playing. But specifically, Virtue's Last Reward is my favorite of the 3. All right, number 1. Number 1 for me, in terms of one of my favorite stories of all time, or just favorite in general. Doesn't have to be of all time. Um, and this one, I'm actually shocked that I absolutely love this game the way that I do in terms of its story. This game originally came out in I want to say 2010 in Japan. It came out in Europe in 2011, and then it came out over here in 2012, and then it got ported again to 2 platforms. It got ported to the
I know what it
3DS
is.
and the Switch. And the game I'm talking about is Xenoblade Chronicles, the first one. This game was incredible.
Oh
This game,
yeah.
Yeah.
this game to me, like, um, I didn't think it was good. I didn't think the story was gonna be as good. Like, I love the characters. I loved everything that they were doing with this game. Just the big worlds. Like, you had like these 2 gigantic titans that represent 2 different worlds, and then you just have to explore everything. And like all these characters, like, just one character. There was one character in the game that I connected with, and I was just shocked to see just what happened with them overall. Again, no spoilers. I can't really go into detail on that one, but if anyone knows, they knows. But
Oh, I know. Because the game takes you through so many twists and turns, right?
yes,
That's an emotional game.
it really is. Like, that game, that hit me really hard. And like, there are some characters that are lighthearted, in general. Like Ricky, I like him a lot.
Yeah, Ricky.
Um,
Great character.
and honestly, I feel that um with how deep the story is, and not to mention the side quests that also adds to the game. Like there's plenty of side quests that you can do. But in terms of the main story, to me the main story is like the equivalent of having like the most expensive steak with mashed potatoes at the most expensive restaurant you could think of. I don't know what other type of analogy I could probably compare it to, but that's how amazing it really is. That's how much I really enjoyed and how invested I was with Xenoblade Chronicles. Like I enjoyed Xenoblade Chronicles 2, though not nowhere near as much as Xenoblade Chronicles 1. I still think that Xenoblade Chronicles 1 is a lot better. I still have to finish 3. I want
Two's the weakest in the series, but all of them are still really good, and anything Monolith has made has been very good.
Yes, and I will say though that for me, my weakest one would probably be out of the ones I played. My weakest one is actually X, even though that's actually the first one I played. I mainly like X mainly just for like the open world and the environment and everything. But I personally think that I do like 1 and 2 story more, and I will eventually get back to 3 and finish that one. But Xenoblade 1 was absolutely incredible. That to me is the epitome of like just how to make a great story. Like, and honestly, that solidified me as saying any game that Monolith Soft makes, I'm buying it. That game in particular. But yeah, that's my other choice. Xenoblade Chronicles. But the version I've started and finished specifically was the one on the Switch. Even though I have all 3 because the first one I got as a gift from my buddy Royal Blue Wizard many years ago. The second one I got it when I got my Majora's Mask new 3DS XL, and the third one, like I bought it. It was during the pandemic, and I bought it. I happened to see it, so I'm like, yeah, I gotta get it. So
it's definitive version for a reason.
Exactly.
But I will say, just Monolith in general, they're like the kings of world building. World building's where they really are amazing at.
Yeah, I love their world building, and that's why I'm like that. If they decided to make like a game that's not really an RPG, like they wanted to make like an action adventure game, but use the same type of world building they have, I'm down. I'm down for anything as long as, because like I know for a fact that they're gonna provide a good story. So I still want to play some of their earlier games, like the Xenosaga games or Xenogears, Batten Kaitos, or hell, I even want to play Disaster Day of Crisis. That's another one they did that never came out here because thanks, Reggie, for nothing. But anyway, Xenoblade, great game. Fantastic game. So the next question I'll ask before we get to the community questions, why do we feel that video game stories are important? We'll all have our own answers and opinions on this, but Shad, we'll start with you first.
So I've mentioned before, video games are different than most other media in that they're interactive media. And I think that good stories are important for video games because of that, because they can leverage it more than anything else in terms of immersiveness. You as the player are invested in the game because you're interacting with the game, sometimes even making choices that affect the game. And I think that is one reason that they are that storytelling is very important in video games, and it's come to be kind of an integral part in almost every genre. When like early video games obviously had light stories, if any. Mm-hmm. Then also there's the fact that they're kind of collaborative storytelling, which earlier examples of collaborative storytelling would be stuff like Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop RPGs, a story where you as a player help make the story, and some of the more open-ended stories where you're kind of like a lot of open world stories. Since you have control over what you do, who you help, you're shaping the story, and the story wasn't already preset, which is a pretty big thing. One game that is kind of a good example that's been fairly recent with Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
It's brought a lot of people into heavy story-based games that aren't used to that type of game. And the amount of variation and how different each person's experience is pretty huge in a game like that. And it really sets a pretty high bar for a lot of interactive storytelling. And also there's the fact that storytelling in general, ever since storytelling first started being a thing for humans, thousands and thousands of years ago, it was to teach lessons, teach morals, to teach. And a good video game story can still do that, sometimes in a way that just a book can't, because you have repercussions over what you do in the game, and that can stick with you a lot.
Yep.
And so for all those reasons, I think storytelling is important in video games. And while there will be games that don't really need a story, we'll always have solid Mario games that plot is just save Peach or something. At least they're moving away from that, but like stop Bowser from doing bad thing.
Yeah.
While that's fine to have for games, I think it's important especially for new games that want to be established, to think on how they can effectively tell a story with their game.
All right. Very good. Zach, what would you say, why would you feel like that video game stories are important?
Well, Shad took one of my answers.
It's okay.
I'll elaborate on that too a little bit. Honestly, something that's really great with a lot of stories is just how much you can learn from them. So building off of that, like, especially like there are some games where you go in and it's like, sometimes you'll expect, like, okay, like I've said earlier, like the characters in the world, but there are some games that also that I've really come to like to have a lot of historical context. Like there's a lot of historical facts and things you learn, especially through characters and just different lenses that you don't, like I said, for example, for Mario, like, yeah, Mario's an Italian plumber, but you don't learn anything about Italy through Mario. You just learn wahoo mushrooms and saving the princess. Like, there's a lot of unique perspectives that you can learn through games. When you have characters from different backgrounds that you might not be used to, you learn a lot through the eyes of those characters sometimes, and especially when you're someone like me who's just kind of just pasty white guy who doesn't really know much about different cultural perspectives. It can be a really good tool to help broaden perspectives and open eyes to different things that you might not be used to, or see things that might lead to conversations that some people might be uncomfortable with.
Right.
So it's really, really important that this is I think more of a thing with games nowadays, but it's important to have that vision. And with the technologies that we have for video games nowadays, we don't just have little pixels on screen, running from point A to point B. Now you have these whole worlds that you can build, and voice acting and models and characters and all this stuff that we didn't have back in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And it's really important that nowadays that video games really dive into that a little bit, explore different things that people might not be used to, and we're seeing that a lot more. I'm loving that. But also another thing that's great with storytelling is, this is more so specifically for the people making the stories, it's such a creative outlet. Some of the most well-liked and well-known games or maybe not well-known, but well-received games are the games that take a little bit of risk. One of the most heavily talked about games last year was Animal Well. That little indie game that didn't have like the big budget, it didn't have all this stuff, but it had a story that a lot of people attached to, and it was a 2D sprite game. Like, it wasn't like, it didn't need to be the scale or the scope of a lot of games nowadays. If it has a good story, people are going to resonate with it. People are going to like it, and people are going to attach themselves with it. And for the creators of the games, it's a way for them to outlet all of their creative thinking, creative abilities. And, like Shad said, there are some things that books and movies just cannot capture. Having that interaction, the ability to manipulate the world around you in some cases, and to impact the characters and the world, everything around you, there's so much creativity that people can put into these games, into these stories, that you just can't do in any other medium. So I think storytelling in video games is very important. And if you asked me that question 10 years ago, I would have been like, what story? I just want to play Mario Party. I don't want to play Super Mario. Like, it is a very, very important part of gaming, and I'm very happy that, even though like RPGs have had storytelling for many, many years, other genres are really, I mean, nowadays you see more of the narrative experience that I really think started with The Last of Us and really built on from there, that we see a lot more nowadays that I personally have really fallen in love with.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's a matter of like just how they handle all of it. But there's still a lot more to talk about here. Bowie, why do you feel that video game stories are important?
So everyone took all my answers. So, but I guess the one answer that y'all haven't mentioned yet is escapism. And
Yeah.
I feel like with stories, you can actually play through a game and learn more about another world than the crappy world that you're currently in.
Yeah.
And so when I was in college, I went to a university that wasn't exact. I mean, it wasn't well. Let's just say that the more I went through the stayed in that school, the more progressive I became. So because of the people that I've interacted with, I really did shun myself away from hanging out with people at that school.
Yeah.
So I turned to video games as a kind of escapism. I had a Nintendo DS Lite at the time. I'd play games like, Castlevania, Order of Ecclesia, or Time Hollow, the Ace Attorney games. And the stories there is just there to entertain me, put me in a happier mood, get me away from all the stresses that I was going through at the time during school. So escapism is a really huge factor in stories that help me cope with life.
Yeah.
Learning about different characters that you know that are pretty cool, pretty amazing, pretty awful. And then with those kind of characters, they help me relate with why stuff is going on with my life too.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah. So I'd say that's a really good factor for me.
Yeah. I will also echo escapism because I've dealt with that too growing up, and one of them between like having to deal with a lot of constant bullying in school or having other life events, like for example, I remember playing Super Mario Galaxy 1, and around the time that that game came out, not long afterwards I was dealing with death in the family
Oh,
because like my uncle around that time passed away, and that was the game that I was playing alongside a couple of others around that time because we just got an Xbox 360 around that time, in addition to already having a Wii. Um, but what I remember is like just being able to play like all these games just to be able to escape from whatever's going on. But there are times in which that sometimes that, from my own personal perspective, that I'm mainly playing games also just to be able to feel better, to be able to help with just vibe, just chill. Because if I'm dealing with a lot of stress, a lot of mental health, I just want to play something just to feel better. But there are times where like um I have different reasons why I want to play the game. But in regards to story, just getting into a different story, um, depending on the type of game as to and what type of story it is, it does definitely help with my mental health.
yeah.
To get me feeling a lot better. Even if it's just a little better for just that moment. Something that I can get through. But then there are times in which that I'm playing a game and I was already in like a very stressful mood, but then the game's story leads to something that ends up stressing me out. And if that happens, I just turn it off and just take a break. But um but at the same time, why do I feel that video game stories are important? For me, like um I feel that they're very important because to me that um it's a way to help connect with characters, connect with the world, the setting, and everything. It's basically what puts all the pieces of the puzzle together. How you have the whole world revolve around like the characters that you're using and the surroundings, what they're going through. And to be quite honest, I wouldn't really have it any other way. Like, because I just want to be, like I said, I want to be able to connect with the characters and everything that surrounds them. But because it just goes back to that point for me, like being the connection. Um, aside from that, you all like already said everything else I would have wanted to say, um, but yeah, so now let's do the community questions. Um, so the way we're gonna do it, like, we won't spend too long on them. We'll just say our own opinions on, like, so our own answers on them. But, um, so let's talk about this one is from the Epic Man. What makes storytelling so memorable to you? And for this one, uh, Shad, you want to go first with that one?
Sure. A lot of times, stories in games really stick with me because of the uh heightened emotions they can put me in. A lot of it's especially common with like RPGs that have like big cutscenes that are like, equal to like movie scenes in terms of like how how well the voice acting is, how well the animation is. And so like sometimes if they really hit me, I have to like just take a break after that scene just to kind of like let my emotions die down. But those scenes really stick with me because the heightened emotions make them easier to remember. And I think that that's a very having those memories stick out to you, those emotional things help you better think about your own emotions. And I think that's just something in general with media, with storytelling in general, that seeing other expressions of the emotions help you better express your own emotions.
Okay, Zach.
For me, I'm one of those people where it's like when I'm playing a game, and this could be any game regardless of how heavy the story is, I always like to be engaged, like intellectually engaged, which sounds freaking sounds a bit dot. What I mean is I like to think when I'm playing a game, and when it comes to a story, if there's a twist, that's what stands out to me. If there's a good twist in a story to where someone's revealed to be a villain or someone's revealed to be good, and it just makes me really think back on the story and be like, okay, like, because sometimes I'll step back and be like, what happened in the story that could have clued me into that this person was this way or that this was a certain way. And because honestly, Shad had my answer of emotion, so I'm just coming up with this one on the spot. But honestly, like I do, like, many games when they kind of throw that curveball at you, it just gets me into a certain mindset, and it makes me remember a game more. It makes me really think more about, or it makes me think about the story differently. It puts me into a different perspective of, okay, why did my mind, because like every time the twist gets me, every single freaking time. So it's like, why did my brain make me believe that this person was good or think that this person was bad? And it can change my perspective on things, and I really love when a story kind of can do that.
Mm-hmm. All right, Bowie.
What was the question again?
Okay. The question is, what do you think makes storytelling so memorable to you?
So I'd say all of it's the dialogue. So I find dialogue to be most stimulating to me, especially when I play through the Ace Attorney games.
Yeah.
It's just like when you read through the dialogue, I like voicing the characters, and I love like reading about what they're doing, what's going on, and all these little twists and turns that go about whenever you try to press the witnesses and the the murderer, and I'd say that's what makes me most stimulated, is just hearing dialogue and just being more immersed in a story that way, because because these characters feel real, and they're the ones who propel the story. They're the ones who make the story more fleshed out, more 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 compelling for you to keep playing the game. So with the Ace Attorney games, you're just most of it's just dialogue,
Yeah.
and I love it's just things about the Ace Attorney games that make me more compelled to keep playing, because we want to keep finding out, we want to know what's going to happen next with with how the murder victim die. Oh well, what was the motivation for the murder to murder the murder victim? Stuff like that.
Yeah. Okay. My answer is the moments. The moments in a game makes the storytelling more memorable to me. Like, depending on the game, like there'll be some really good moments where like the most amazing thing could actually happen to a character, or there's one big event that you instantly stop, or finding out who did this, who did that. Um the twists are really what makes the moments so memorable for stories. Um Depending on the games, like for example, like going back to the Zero Escape games, but I'm also gonna go take it one step further and also mention another game that I would say like has some pretty good moments, pretty good characters. I highly recommend playing Arcade Spirits. I know that it's part visual novel, part dating sim, but I really do think that just being able to connect with the characters in that game really helps. And they have some pretty good moments in that game too. So my answer is moments. Next one is from Dari. Does a good story get in the way of gameplay, or does it help it? I have a short answer. It just helps it. It does not get in the way. That's all. That's my answer. Shad?
A good story? A good story wouldn't get in the way of the gameplay at all. Not if it's a good story.
Yeah.
Like, there are certainly games that the story gets in the way of the gameplay, but that's because the story isn't good enough to complement the gameplay.
Yeah. Zach?
I agree. That's actually like a lot of people's biggest complaints on games like what supermassive games do, like Until Dawn and stuff like that, because a lot of it is heavily the cutscenes and the story. People say there's like so little gameplay, but I feel like if the story is strong enough, especially in a game like Until Dawn, where the whole purpose of the game is to get all characters to survive until dawn, you need that time with the characters. You need those cutscenes to where you see them interact. You gain a sense of liking character or not liking them. So I think it does help it quite a bit.
All right. Bowie? Do you think that a good story gets in the way of gameplay, or does it help it?
For the most part, it does help, but there are times where it gets in the way. Where best example would be the Metal Gear games. So Metal Gear Solid 1 didn't have that too much, but start with Metal Gear Solid 2 and onwards. Hideo Kojima, as talented as he is as a game dev and a story writer, he does get a bit self-indulgent at times. And he does get a bit, puerile with the way that he tells his stories.
Right.
And when he goes off and on these like 20 minutes scenes, the story does get in the way, and I'm like, I just want to move on with the game. I just want to see explore more of the world. So there's rare exceptions where the story's like, it's great, but then you keep you're going on and on about something that should have ended like 15 minutes ago. So
Right. Like basically when it goes way too long.
right.
Yeah. Okay, I get, and that part I definitely get it. Next one is from Professor Icepick. Are there any genres where you feel that good storytelling is a necessity? Which ones? If I have to pick one, I'll just tell you. Visual novels. Visual novels easily. You need to have a really good story.
For
Like,
sure.
That's the main example.
They're like 99% story. So yeah.
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 I'll go with you for this one, ZakPak. What's your answer? Like,
I mean, there are. I mean, there's a lot of genres that really rely on. Because there's one answer which I'm going to give to someone else because I know they'll probably be able to explain more than me. But the narrative games, the games like where like the branching paths narrative, like the Life is Strange, like the Until Dawns, where the whole point is the characters in the story. Like that's the main purpose of the game. Like I do think there are a lot of genres though that do really need a good story to help it go through. But I'll stick with narrative games.
okay. Bowie?
JRPGs.
Yep.
That was the one I left out. I was like, yeah, that's yes.
Absolutely. I agree with JRPGs. Shad?
I'll just go a little broader. RPGs in general. There's at this point there's a saturation of RPGs and they're long, and if you don't have a story to get invested in, they get old before you'll finish them.
All right. So next up is from Dragon. What do you think about games that end in story cliffhangers that require you to play the next game to see the story through? Hate it. Hate it, hate it, hate it. And I'll tell you why. The worst cliffhangers out there are the ones where once you finish the game and you see the cliffhanger and you're expecting the next game to come out, it doesn't happen because the game didn't sell well to warrant making another one. And in one case, one game that addressed it, that was about to have a game that addresses everything, and it gets canceled because incompetence. So, and if you want a prime example of that, Mega Man Legends 3.
Yep.
Still fucking salty about that shit. Sorry. Yeah, I kind of like went there with that. All right. But what's your answers? I'll go with you, Zach, again.
It's interesting. It's funny. At first, I was gonna say, yeah, like cliffhangers like are pretty good because like they could literally build hype for the next story they want to tell. Because there's a lot of instances where like a cliffhanger is a nice way to kind of cut a story that might be too long otherwise. So rather than cutting bits of your story, you just kind of split it into two. But then, Shell, hearing your point, that actually I do agree with that. Where if the game doesn't sell well, you're completely relying on A, people liking the story, and B, the game selling well enough to warrant getting a sequel. So I do understand that perspective of it as well. So I don't know if there's a complete cut and dry answer. Like some games do really work with a cliffhanger. But then there's others where it's like, is it A, needed? Like sometimes if you just throw a cliffhanger in there just to have it, not every story needs it. But, I don't know. So I'm 50-50 on that one.
Okay. Bowie?
I'd say a cliffhanger game, a cliffhanger ending in a game can be good, as long as the company is still running and has enough funds to actually fund the next game.
Yeah.
And they have a good, they have a clear plan of how to continue the game because. We're still waiting for Half-Life 3. We're still waiting for Beyond Good and Evil 2.
Yeah.
Those games have not materialized for the past decade or so. So I think cliffhangers, they can be a letdown. But I think you have to have a solid studio to be able to create the next game to continue that. To continue on from that cliffhanger, like Retro Studios, they've made the Metroid Prime games, and they had a clear vision of what the next game's going to be with Metroid Prime 2 Echoes and Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, and then they're going to be coming out with Metroid Prime 4, even though it's taking a little bit longer than expected because of issues that Nintendo had. They had to give away Metroid Prime 4 to Retro Studios again. They're still there. I mean, we've seen a trailer for it. Most likely, they're going to have a Metroid Prime 4 coming out. So, I'm kind of split with cliffhanger endings, but as long as the studio is still running, they're not there's no infighting going on to cause a developer to leave the company and not make the sequel, then yeah, I'm fine with them as long as the company is still stable.
Yeah. Okay. That's absolutely fair. Shad.
Well, most of what I had to say has been said. I will say that the two factors that determine whether a cliffhanger is good or not, one is the other game already for sure coming? Is it like already in development and maybe only a couple years away, so that there's not a risk that poor performance will make that a moot point? And the second is, how big is the cliffhanger? With an example of the Great Ace Attorney. I'm not going to say spoilers, but it's a good thing we got the two games together, because the first game ends with such huge cliffhangers. It was an unwritten story. And I think Golden Sun's also an example where they did it right with the end of Golden Sun 1, which had a big cliffhanger for Golden Sun 2, but the Golden Sun 2 was far in development and was coming out only like a year or two later.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Golden Sun Dark Dawn literally ended with a to be continued. Like, it said to be continued on the screen, and we never got another game. So, and that's the ugly side of cliffhangers. And if you can avoid that happening, great, but you need to be damn sure that you're going to finish your story.
This one is from DM21, who also goes by Grave54. What qualities do you think a villain or antagonist should have to elevate the story? So the only thing I'm gonna say in regards to that is, take a look at Kafka in Final Fantasy VI and see their motives, see exactly just what he does, because he is one of the most nonsensical villains I've ever seen. Everything about him just epitomizes the fact that this guy he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows why he's doing it, and he does it. Even if there's going to be consequences, he doesn't care about that. He just wants to do it. So I would suggest people to play Final Fantasy VI. But that's basically the answer that I can come up with. Bowie, do you have an answer to this? What qualities do you think a villain or antagonist should have to elevate the story?
What qualities a villain or antagonist should have to elevate the story?
Yeah.
Like just to go piggyback on what you were saying with Kefka, like I played Final Fantasy VI a long time ago. I don't remember. I remember the general story, but I don't remember exactly what Kefka's motivations were, because I think he didn't have any motivations. He was just insane, right? And then, so he didn't have a reason.
That's a type of villain.
I'm sorry?
That is a type of villain.
Right, that's what I'm saying. He didn't have any motivation. He was just chaos. He just wanted to destroy the world.
Yeah.
And you can have a reason like that. And then, but for other kinds of villains, I guess it's just going to be based off of real life. People are just going to have different reasons why they want to harm other people, or harm, or destroy a city, or even destroy the whole world or universe.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we might not ever know their motivations. Like in I think in the Shin Megami Tensei games, we just know that the final boss is always a goddess who destroys the world. and I think there's more to it. There's probably like there's if you like read maybe um, some books or that are related to the Shin Megami Tensei series. There's more reasons, but in the games, I think there's usually not a reason. Sometimes the characters, the villains, don't have a reason to do the things that they do. They just do it. Like
Yeah.
Bowser, he just wants to take over the Mushroom Kingdom, and marry Princess Peach or Toadstool or Peach.
Peach Toadstool.
Reason.
That's her name.
Toadstool. I mean, it's both, but yeah, there's just he just has he just doesn't he's just doing it because that's just what the developers want him to do, so that way they can make this game.
Yeah.
As for like people like characters like Sephiroth in Final Fantasy VII, he does have a motivation. He felt wronged by all the people that he thought were his enemies, because he thought that he wasn't real exactly a human. I mean, he kind of is, he kind of isn't, but but the thing is though, because he was infused with Mako, and he was experimented on so much, and he was misled. I think his motivations were due to being misled, and that's what motivates him to be the way that he is. But I think the rest is just based off of real life. People were abused. People are just born that way. People are they just are selfish. So they're just like us.
Yeah. And that's just how it is. What about you, Shad? What qualities do you think a villain or antagonist should have to elevate the story?
Well, I can kind of think of two good types of villain, like well done types of villains, and one of them is sympathetic villains, which has been very popular in recent years. But honestly, I think the best villains are the ones that really make you hate them. The ones that do acts in the game that you feel are unforgivable and that piss you off as a player.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I think if you hate the villain, I think they did a good job at writing the villain.
Yep. Zach.
Thankfully, no one said this one yet. I really like when you don't know who the villain is until the end, and then you learn about them. Like that's where I like the twists and everything.
Yeah.
Where I like when a villain, especially when you know the villain throughout the story, but you do not know they are the villain.
Yep.
They are unassuming. They are just like you. You can even like them. You could build a relationship with them. You feel a certain way that you like them, but then the moment clicks where they become the villain. That always hits for me when you learn about who they are, what they've done, what they do.
The betrayal.
Betrayal. It always hits.
Yep. And as someone who has grown up watching a lot of professional wrestling, growing up watching like a wrestler who you love rooting for, and then all of a sudden they become the bad guy, or in the wrestling term, they turn heel, and then they end up like attacking another wrestler who's supposed to be like either a friend or like an ally, and people are shocked and like, why are you doing this? And then the fans start booing them, and then eventually like they start after a couple of weeks they start embracing the role to be the bad guy, and then it turns out like they're better at being a bad guy than being a good guy, because they know how to play it up. They know how to get you to want you to hate them so much. So I can totally understand that perspective, Zach. We have one more question, and this one's from Mr. Ben. Have there been any games that you played where you had such high hopes for the story or got really invested in the plot line, only for the game or series to just completely drop the ball? And Zach, I want to start with you on this one.
I was going to ask a clarifying question here, because I feel like this question is going to be impossible to answer without saying spoilers for games. Because talking about the endings and dropping the ball, and I feel like, at least for me, I can't talk about this without at least spoiling the game. And I'm going to choose a smaller game to spoil, so no worries on that. There has been one game that I really do feel like dropped the ball, and I've come to appreciate it a little more in recent years. But well, it only came out a few years ago. But Supermassive Games released this series called the Dark Pictures Anthology, which is a bunch of smaller stories that all take place within some sort of historical context.
Yeah.
There's one game called Little Hope. That game takes place where it's heavily involved with the Salem witch trials. It's a really freaking good game, and the story throughout it is really cool because you get to teleport between modern day to back during the Salem witch trials. Really cool. But the ending completely ruined the game, and I will spoil it. So spoiler alert if you want to play Little Hope. But the ending is it all happened in the guy's head. It was his imagination. None of it actually happened. And a lot of games do have that trope. There are other games I know that have that plot twist, and it's like, especially in a game like that where the objective is to make sure all of your characters survive, where you learn none of them ever existed to begin with. Just kind of, it's like, oh, okay, so none of it even mattered. Like, that does happen a bit in game tropes. So yeah, that game definitely did do that to me. And any game that has that trope of like, oh, none of it actually happened, it can work. But a lot of the times it's like, well, then did any of it really matter?
Yeah, I can even think of a game that was mentioned tonight. I won't say the name, that kind of does that trope, but does it well. So
exactly, yeah. Some do it well, but then others like that don't.
Yep. Bowie, do you have an answer for this one?
So, you said the question was like you basically a story from a game that just basically disappointed me.
Like that dropped the ball because
Yeah.
you had the most highest hopes possible,
Yeah.
and was invested, but it dropped the ball.
Oh, that's Final Fantasy 15. So throughout 2/3 of the game, I was really into it, and I was really enjoying the open world environments that I was exploring in the game. I like the Chocobros. That's what a lot of people call them, and so I was really into even driving around the whole world too, and there came a point where it's not exactly a spoiler, but well, it kind of is. There came a point where the world there's no more open world basically, and then I was it was the last thirds of the game, and I was just so disappointed that the game just. I understand that the Final Fantasy 15 has been through development hell. It's been through a lot of changes, and that's what contributed to why the game's the way it is at the very end. But it still wasn't an excuse. I was disappointed. The game went from like a 10 to like a 6 or a 7. I was just I expected there to be more in the last third of the game, because I want to explore the other area, the other world that without saying too much about it. I want to explore that world, but it never happened. And then basically I just after I beat the game, I was like, I'm never playing this game again. And from what I hear, Final Fantasy 16 is more of a semi-open world. So so I'm looking forward to playing Final Fantasy 16 because it has a better, more structured story, and since the game isn't as big, but it's still big. Compared to Final Fantasy 15, it's going to be more structured, so I'm looking forward to that one compared to 15.
All right. Shad.
So it's kind of already been mentioned earlier in other topic questions, but the Zero Escape games, they really start out very solid, and 2, in my opinion, is the peak of the game, of the trilogy. And it's the type of game that ends with massive cliffhangers because it expects a third game, which, by the way, almost never released. And the third game really fumbles it. Light spoiler warnings, if just for anybody watching. But it ends with the motivation of the main villain saying verbatim, my motivations are varied and complex, and you never get another reasoning. And that is the most wet fart of a villain motivation I have ever seen in any series. Like, that was the worst writing I could imagine. So,
Like, funny enough, that was actually going to be my answer because, like, that pissed me off to the point where, like, there was no epilogue. You wanted an epilogue, you had to load the game up again, and then, like, there was just text-based, like, endings in a sense where it shows, like, what happened to these characters and all that stuff. It felt forced. I hated it.
It felt like there was also like a cliffhanger, but it wasn't a cliffhanger because the person who wrote it made it clear this was the final one. He'd never revisit it.
Because like
the game itself has good moments. I don't want to say this game that Zero Time Dilemma is awful.
Yeah.
But it definitely was a letdown after the previous games.
Oh yeah, it absolutely was. And the thing is that the entire series in Japan bombed. Like, they did not do well. None of them. The only reason the third game even existed in the first place is because they did well outside of Japan. It's just in Japan, they flopped hard. Like, both of them did.
Yeah.
More so the second game than the first, but still, it's just really bad in terms of sales. But that ending, yeah. But the other answer that I would go with, if I had to pick one game that I had such a high hopes for the story, and I was really getting invested with the plotline, but it dropped the ball. I'm gonna tell you my answer right now, and this one would definitely be like, why would you pick this series in regards to storytelling? But the thing is, yeah, this series does have some really good storytelling, but I feel like sometimes I think that they can go in completely different directions compared to what they actually did. And me personally, I'm gonna have to go and say Mortal Kombat 11. Yes, I'm going with a fighting game because but in this case, Mortal Kombat, like from Mortal Kombat's 9 and onwards, they started to put more emphasis on the story so you can understand the lore, to get you invested in the characters, invested in the world of Mortal Kombat. But in Mortal Kombat 11, so they had this whole storyline in which that they had characters come from the past to meet their future selves. And the purpose of it is to try to reset the time because the time got messed up. Because there was a character named Chronica who was able to control the time. And like one of the main characters in the series, Raiden, who is supposed to be the god of thunder in the Mortal Kombat world, like they were at odds because you have all the elder gods, and then you have the remnants who are characters who were originally heroes in the Mortal Kombat series, because 9 was a reboot, and then everything else afterwards, except for the new Mortal Kombat 1, build up from that. Like, these characters who were once heroes end up becoming evil. Long story short, Raiden's an idiot. Play Mortal Kombat 9 to find out why. But for me personally, what really disappointed me was the fact that the ending to that game was a huge cop-out. Spoilers, the two Liu Kangs merged and become a fire god. It is so dumb. I don't know why they did that. And then they made a DLC campaign called Mortal Kombat 11 Aftermath, which is supposed to add more to the story, but all it did was retcon some of the things. It didn't even add anything. Like, they just added more characters who weren't in the main story. They ended up retconning some stuff, like a character died, but then they decided to retcon that death. It was so stupid. If anything, I think it made it worse. So it got to the point where I didn't even get the new one, Mortal Kombat 1, which came out last year. And from what I heard, it was a little better, but not much better. But yeah, Mortal Kombat 1. So Mortal Kombat 11. That's my answer. I was actually getting invested in the story, and then as time moved on, the story dropped the ball. That's all. So yeah, that is going to do it for sharing with Shellshock. And this was a really good discussion. And again, I want to thank you guys for coming through to this episode.
Of course.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Yeah,
It was fun.
it was. But before we go, we'll start with you, Shad. Where can we find you?
So you can find me usually at Twitch, twitch.tv/ShadJV, where I tend to stream Tuesdays and Thursdays, and right now on Mondays, and sometimes there's an extra day somewhere in there. And then also you can find me at YouTube. On YouTube, I'm sure Shell has the YouTube link, but I go by ShadJV in there too, and I just upload VODs that are usually it's a few months after, but it's just the VODs.
Yep.
And then you can also find me on Twitch, or not Twitch. I said Twitch, on Twitter, and on Blue Sky is just ShadJV.
All right. And where can we find you, Zach?
Primarily I'm over on the YouTubes, just ZakPak, ZakPak. Like I said earlier, talk about just video games I'm interested in and stuff. You know, that's mainly where I am. I want to get back into Twitch streaming. I've been debating it. I took a bit of a break from it. But twitch.tv/ZakPak. And I'm also on Twitter or X, however you prefer to refer to it as. I still have class and I still call it Twitter. At just ZakPak. I think it's ZakPak YT is the official handle. I'm also on Blue Sky. Have yet to really use it, but in case Elon does more stupid things, we might all be transitioning over there. And then I'm also on Instagram at ZakPak Official.
Okay. And Bowie, where can we find you?
You can find me at twitch.tv/KoopaBooey. And I'm currently on a break right now, but I will be back streaming usually Wednesdays through Sundays. But considering my life situation, I'll probably be streaming some more after that. So you can also find me at KoopaBooey on YouTube, Koopa_Booey on TikTok, and KoopaBooey on Twitter.
Yep.
And then on my YouTube channel, you'll just find my VODs and shorts versions of my TikTok videos.
All right. Awesome. And you can find me pretty much on everywhere, on all the social medias, all the stratospheres, all the multiverses you could come up with. You can find me pretty much just about everywhere that you could think of. And next week, we have another episode of Sharing with Shellshock, where the topic is going to be all about gaming magazine memories. So we did Nintendo Power already, but now this will be about every single video game magazine that you could think of. From like Game Informer to Electronic Gaming Monthly and so much more. We'll talk a little bit about Nintendo Power as well, but it's going to be mainly everything else. So yeah. But yeah, thank you guys so much. Shad, Zach, Bowie, thank you so much once again. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
And
Thank you so much.
Anytime.
And for everybody, I will see you guys next week for the next episode of Sharing with Shellshock. So make sure to take care of yourselves, be awesome, stay awesome, tell your loved ones you love them, check about them as always, find everlasting peace. And I'll see you guys next time. And y'all have a wonderful night, everybody. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.